Uh, morning, or afternoon, what have you. Either or, something like that. Who knows? I'll get my chat open. Hello, hello. Oh, that's a fun one. Hello, hello. Everybody having a good day? See if I can get any good cuts coming. See if I can get cuts that are good enough that you can all hear them. See how well that works. We'll know if any of them are bad, because you won't. It'll sound really. You probably won't even hear it if it's bad, but you might not hear it if it's good. I don't know. It's gonna be a question to answer. This Siggy is pretty loud, so it shouldn't be too hard to get it to pick up. We'll see. That was okay. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Gotta love a good whoosh. Let me get us there. Oh, let's see. Those going. Oh, bad. Got too much arm into that. That was pretty good. That was better. That was not bad. I find that these tend to be a bit easier to really like whip it when you're stationary and you're just doing hips. Those tend to carry it a little bit better. Whoosh. I've got a few things out with me today. If anyone has any questions about anything. I got my Siggy Longsword, got my VB Rapier, got my Virginia Montante over there. If I can go get it. Montante, gigantic sword, huge sword, very fun to play with. Doesn't whip quite as loud as the Siggy, but very fun, I would say. What's that with the notches in it now? It's actually sounding different than I'm used to hearing. Thank you. Yeah, I really like Montantes. I think they're very fun. It sounds different now. I wonder if it's because they didn't used to have these notches. I was hitting it against some swords, and so the pristine edge is not so pristine anymore. And I've taken some pretty gnarly gouges into it. I don't know if they're showing up. You can kind of make them out there. And I think they're causing the sound to be a little different, because there's a like the sword one's a little punctuated now. There's something else in it now, and I'm wondering if that's doing anything to it. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds different than I'm used to. Getting it up in speed seems to be more or less yielding the same results, but at the lower speeds, it definitely seemed different. I don't know. This is a Montante. It's just a gigantic sword. This one, I mean, honestly, they could be even bigger than this. This one's a moderately sized one. You know, I could get up to like this height, but mine's only nose height. But yeah, it's like the upper end tends to be about man height, and then the lower end tends to be about chin height. So mine's right there in the middle, which I think works out, right? It's, you know, middle ground, not the biggest, not the smallest, right in the middle. Good length. They're very fun to kick too. That's probably like the most fun part about them, is that you get to start with a little kick up, and then it plays that end in. So you start off with a little kick, doing whatever. Sometimes it's a kick up to here, or it's a kick from, you know, underneath up to there, and then after you've had your fun, you whip it right back around again, and you plant it, and then that's where you finish. It's a very saucy thing. It's, you know, it's almost sunset, not quite sunset. We're getting there. Oh, thank you. Yeah, part of that's, you know, so with my channel, I try to do kind of HEMA for not HEMA people, if that makes sense. I try to get into the nitty gritty in a way that isn't that nitty gritty, if that makes any sense. You know, there are people who will teach, you know, talk HEMA for HEMA people, and those guys are great, or guys and gals, they're great. But basically, I just try to make it consumable. I try to be technical about things, but in a way that is approachable and not too mind-numbing. So, you know, that's also part of why I do the lives, is I like to field questions. So if anybody has any questions while I'm out here, that's kind of what I do with my lives, is I just come out here, I play with the swords, answer questions, do whatever. Well, one thing to note about the Montantes, actually, while I'm sitting here playing with this, is that the handle length can kind of, the handle length changes how you have to throw cuts, because you don't have you can see in the back here how my hands are separated. That limits what I can do when I start to get lower down. So you see, with this hand being so far back, I run out of room here, right? Like, I'm at my hip. There is no more room for the sword to go lower, as opposed to something like my longsword. I can get down to here before I run out of room. So I can cut. You know, I'm not going to cut any lower than that. I'm hitting the ground now. So with a handle length like this, I can, with both arms, I can cut all the way to the ground, no issues, all along the center line here. That's no problem. So that is a problem with a big sword like this. I run out here, right? So if I want to cut down deeper, I can't cut straight down. I have to cut and open up my hips. And when I've opened up my hips, I gain that space back, because now I have this tracking I can do here, and I'm not running into anything. So that's kind of an important component of learning to use one of these as opposed to one of those, is that you have all this more handle that you have to learn how to move around. It's not that it's really heavy, it's just, there's just a lot of space to it. It takes up room that you're not used to. So if you try to cut without being aware of that and opening up your hips, you run into that problem of, well, that doesn't feel right. You can also do a little bit of a body weight drop to like get it lower, but yes, I've done it so much now, I just intuitively open up the hips to get to that lower position. But yeah, you could come to here and like drop, but the angle's still not changing, right? I'm still getting to here and changing, so I can't get that full fall through without opening the hips. And that's desirable because sometimes you want to be able to come back up that line, as opposed to ending up here. Ending up here with the Montante is just, it doesn't feel good, because my arm is like forced to be out from my body. This hand's just kind of here. I like to be able to bring it a little bit back. I have not seen the updated one. I didn't know that there was an updated one. Is it like a new model, or did they just like overhaul like one of the previous models? Because yeah, this is a number 4. So this is not a stock number 4. Mine is shortened. The stock number 4 has like a really long handle. It's crazy long. So this one, the handle's sized kind of to my measurements. So the idea here being that if I'm holding it, it ends. You see right there. Look at that biomechanics right there. It is in hand. It is the span of my arm, or of my upper arm. It's kind of the concept here. And then likewise, those body mechanics kind of like falling in. The grip itself is about the span of my shoulders, more or less. If we think about, let me hold it over here. So if we line it up shoulder to shoulder, it's about the span of my shoulders. And so there are some interesting biomechanical things that happen there, but basically it's, so that you can, if you punch out, your arms are pretty much matchy-matchy, more or less. If I hold the pommel, then they are like completely matched. There's some interesting mechanics there about, basically being able to like clear your head with a big old cross guard and being able to make the necessary movements through. Because if you start to get really big, it does start to run. You start to not be able to use it in a sword. This is basically like the maximum grip length I can have it be, and still use it like a sword. Like still have all the swordy. Because you can already see the me having to open up, right? So if I had a shorter one, I could probably pull off the lower position here, and that'd totally be on the table. If I had reduced it down to like maybe this length, I'd be short enough I could actually fully use it like it's a sword. But it's the difference in handling comes a lot from that handle. So if you start getting much longer than this, then it starts to handle more and more and more like a pole arm, because you have to start treating it like a pole arm in the body to be able to do the things you need to do with it. It just gets interesting. Of course, you can also shorten your grip, right? So as I use this, I will often, like if I need to start like doing rotations like this, I'll usually slip this backhand to about like here, and then I'll, much like using some sort of axe or something, right? Also, I'll shorten, except reversed, I suppose, because with the axe, you'd slip the lead hand back, and then slip it forward. But with the montante, I slip the rear hand back, and then bring it forward. This is the first day I've actually like thought about that distinction. It's interesting, yeah. But yeah, so I'll pull that backhand up in order to get a little more rotation out of it. I find it interesting. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I have my VB right here, and I have a buckler. I dropped the buckler. Thought I could flip it and catch it. So I got this buckler here. Very fun. I wish the chat wouldn't disappear on me. That'd be great. If you notice the tip, I've got a little piece of leather taped on. That just makes the tip. This one doesn't have a particularly like thick tip, so I've just kind of thickened it up with some leather. That seems to help. Any tips for keeping the flow while using a sword? Always look like a gorilla when you try to keep the flow. Start slower. If you feel like you, I mean, the other thing is I feel like I look. Oh my gosh, what's I have an antenna. Why do I have an antenna? You see this? What? I have an antenna. What is going on here? Anyways, but yeah, I feel kind of the same. Like when I'm, oh my gosh, there's no winning. I think I'm just making things worse now. Whatever, good enough. I'm gonna go with this. So I kind of feel the same way. Like when I'm doing sword stuff, I don't actually feel like I look that good when I'm doing it. It's not something I like. I'll go back and watch and be like, oh wow, that looked smoother than I thought it was. But for me, I feel like it doesn't look very smooth when I'm doing it. So I think there's an element of self-criticism involved. You know, you are your own worst critic. Maybe. I mean, there are YouTube comment sections beg to differ. I think I'm pretty sure those are even worse critics than yourself. But Other than that, yeah, YouTube comments aside, you are your own worst critic. The best thing I can offer is just, think about bringing it down, right? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's very fair advice. And just if you feel like you're getting a little hung up, think about, pause, rewind, and see why you feel like you got hung up in a particular spot, and see if you can kind of like rewind. Like if you're trying to flow here to here, and you feel like you kind of got a little, I don't know, a little floppy through there, like maybe it came out flat, right? You kind of, and you don't like that feeling, and you're like, that felt bad. Let me rewind. Let me think about how I got to that position, and let me try to like run through that a few times until I'm happy with it. And then try to then start to speed it up a little bit as you get more confident with it. And then also record yourself. Record your flow, and you'll be able to see. I find that recording flow is good for spotting footwork in a way that doing it is not. Because you start to see like, oh man, that looks terrible. I do not like how my feet looked in that. And then to look for that next time. I'd mostly do longsword. Longsword's my favorite. I love the longsword. Longsword can do a little bit of everything, so it's really good fun. Because, I can use it in one hand if I need to. It's not great. It's not the best one-handed thing. This feels, compared to my rapier, it does not feel good. But, I could use it in one hand. And then there are certain occasions to use it in one hand. Maybe you're working something, you get into some sort of grapple and you need to brandish it that way, or maybe you try to go for some sort of fancy little turn away or whatever. There are occasions to go into one hand with it. Or you're trying to be cheeky and you're starting off in one hand because you're just announcing to the world that your plan is to go into a grapple. You're like, yeah, I'm going to sit here, and then you're going to want to attack me at some point. I'm going to be waiting for you here, and as soon as that attack comes, I am coming in to get my hands on you. That's a very open declaration of intent right there. And so generally when people see somebody standing here, they sort of get like a little wary of it. They're like, I don't like this because this feels deceptively open. What's my favorite longsword fetter manufacturer? I don't know. I don't really have a favorite. I'm using a Siggy right now. I like my Siggy. This Siggy's great. But I like Regaining too. An Elden Ring crouch poke. Gosh, how do they do it? I'm trying to remember. How does he do? I'm trying to remember how the crouch poke goes. Shoot. So it's oh geez, I don't. One of the problems with resting the sword on your shoulder, like in Elden Ring, is if you have no armor on and you got these things. Ow. This hurts. Although I don't think I think it's more, how do they do it? Because they don't only rest it on the shoulder unless it's in one hand. I guess you could do it like here. That wouldn't be so bad. But let's see. So does he go higher? I'm getting too fussy over the details. But let's see. Let me think about this. Let's see. So crouch poke. I think they do it kind of like they go low, so you're crouched. And I think it goes like there with it. Is that right? Then it comes in and then they go thrust like that. I don't really want to thrust from like all the way down. I don't want to throw a thrust from back here. That's not great. I mean, I don't mind. I actually like how he throws the thrust. If I have this right, I think it's about like that when they do it. But I actually rather like how they throw the thrust, crouching aside. But the idea of kind of coming from here and just kind of like throwing the point out, I like that. From up on the shoulder, you could do it a bit faster by just kind of going straight in with it. You don't really have to cast it down like that. That's sort of an extra unnecessary step. But from a gameplay standpoint of, okay, we're giving the player enough time to react. That makes more sense, right? Because if I just come straight in like that, is it a thrust? Is it a cut? Yes. But if I'm used to the player moveset being like anything that comes from up above is going to be a cut, or he's cutting boom like that, so I know when he goes low with it, it's going to be a thrust. And that's just a useful piece of gaming, information. But as far as like how he throws that thrust, I don't really mind it because I rather like it. I just wouldn't do it from here. I'd do it from like, somewhere like low. I would throw it down there. Because that's what he's doing, is he's going from a high position like this, dropping low, and then throwing the point out. But whatever. Any tips for footwork or posture? You struggle staying low and keeping your knees bent. Practice. That's keeping the position. That's just gonna. It's just like there's no simple solution to it. I guess. Well, yeah, there is a simple solution to it. There's no instantaneous fix for it. It's just working on just getting that stance deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is deeper than I ever like hold it. I don't like holding it down here. But there's no reason to not push yourself, right? So it's know when you're getting lazy with it, and like self correct and be like, okay, I've noticed, like, oh, I'm starting to stand up again. Push it back down. And one thing I like to do when I'm drilling and doing practice like with paired drills and stuff, I will deliberately try to hold that squat as long as I can, including between moments, right? So like I'll be in a squat and we'll do the boom, boom, whatever, reset, but I never straighten back up again. I stay in that squat. And that's one way to kind of like sneak it in, is just while you're doing other training, just try to keep that position low and just continue to drill everything from a lower position and then lower position and lower position, and keep trying to push that down, as long as it doesn't conflict with what you're doing, of course. Because you could get so low that the technique doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't really align with what you're doing. So, do as you will. And then, of course, depending on what you're studying, the position might not even be that low, right? And if you're doing something like, you start doing something like Destreza, you might be, out here. I guess I should be like, yeah, you might be doing it from like out here or whatever, and you're not like low at all. You're basically just standing, and you're standing and walking, and that's totally valid because that's what the system wants, right? It's just this, and so forth. But then you do go and look at Meyer, and Meyer's rapier is like down here, and I'm like, my goodness gracious, I don't want to be down here. This is awful. But yeah, he'll do it, and well, he'll throw cuts too. So he'll be like here, and he'll go down to here. Like he will take the cut to the floor, down to here, and you need to be like, in doing this, you need to be ready to be able to pop back up from here explosively. And it's like, oh my gosh. Oh yeah. It's not fun. But I do tend to, like when I'm fencing, I do tend to get pretty low. I do notice I think I'm stronger going low with my left side forward than on my right side. Yeah, I feel stronger the other way. Just goes to show that I do a longsword. Left foot leads, or left leg leads. Not always, but if you're doing like Meyer rapier, right foot leads like always. You're just always right foot forward, unless you're doing some brief engagement on the left foot, but you're always defaulting to that right foot. But then, if I'm doing my longsword, I will generally default to my right or my left foot being forward, and then I'll pass on the right. There's a lot of left, but I'll switch, right? Because as soon as I've passed, Now this foot's forward, and now I have to fence with this foot until I come back and I reset, and now the feet have changed again. How many swords do I have? I don't even know. I gotta be close to like 20 now. There's a lot of them. But, I've never quite figured out a preference between these two. This is the Virginia short and the Siggy short, and I don't really have can't really put my finger on a preference here. Oh, this one sounds great when you cut with it. That thing's really loud, wow. Fun. How did I get started in this? What got me into it? That would be in college. I really wanted to do fencing, like sport fencing, but the college collegiate fencing team went under, so that didn't really work out. But while I was at college, I got heard through word of mouth that there was a HEMA club in my area, and I figured, well, that sounds fun. Let me go try that. And I did, and now it's been like 8 years. So here we are. Yes, it is very wobbly in the bind. It is super flexible in the bind. This is the Siggy, or sorry, this is the Virginia here. So I'm just kind of putting like basic pressure so you can just kind of see. So holding it here, just some light pressure, doing a little few flicks here. This thing's, it's got flex, but it has some give. It doesn't have too much give. And then here's the Siggy. I mean, same pressure. Like you can look at the difference here. That is like me putting the same amount of pressure, and it is just obviously bowing. So you'll feel that when you use one of these, you're going to feel it. And this is the short, so like imagine on an even longer sword how noticeable that's going to be. You're going to feel it. I mean, I can really launch this thing. So yeah, I mean, look at it go. So that's something you have to bear in mind when you're using these. You can't really do any binding on the flat of your weak up here because you're just going to yield. So you need to be edge on into any bind you do with one of these. Well, you'd be hard pressed to have a beheading with one of these. They're super duper totally blunt. There's no edge on this. I mean, there's some like if I like really start to grind on this, I'm sure I'll find a burr or something that'll give me a little nick. But yeah, you're not cutting through anything with one of these. It is. Yeah, I mean, you can see the edge there, right? There is no sharpness to that. I really like what Siggy does for the grips, though. I 100% prefer this grip to the Virginia. You can see, so they do some sort of coating, some sort of clear coat on their grips, and so you can see my grip has taken some hits. It does not look so pristine anymore, and there's a little bit of fraying there, but for the most part, when you take a hit on a Siggy, they just kind of dent. Whereas if you take a hit on the Virginia, or even just over time, it just starts to fray. And look at all that fraying. So, but that's not really a deal breaker, or even like that much of a selling point, just because you can just put a clear coat on your Regenia if you want. Right? Like, it's not much trouble to just get some sort of clear coat and just slather it. Which is what I do with my other swords. That's my wife's sword, so it doesn't have one. But yeah, whenever I have an exposed cord grip, that gets coated. Funnily enough, I've actually had a lot of success using super glue. Actually, I get some super glue with like a brush applicator, and I'll clamp down the sword, and I'll just coat all the cord in super glue and let it dry. And then once it's dried with the super glue, it gets this nice coat on it, and you get the same end result of it, just not fraying or anything. So I'm sure there are better solutions than using super glue for that, but I do like to I find that anything that really saturates the cords kind of helps, because it also means that like if you take a really bad hit and it breaks, it'll pop off in like a chunk, and you can like kind of like push it back down and glue it closed again, and you won't actually look all that bad or anything. I've got a sword up there that's been like repatched several times with glue. Seems to do the trick. The faster it goes, the more whippy that sound gets. Oh, I do like the spatulated tips on the Siggies. I like these a lot. These feel very safe, because you always run the risk of a rolled tip snapping. And if a rolled tip snaps, you just have an edge. Whereas a nice thick spatulated tip, not really prone to just like snapping in the same way. It's, yeah, that's just real nice and thick. Not much to worry about there. There's a one-handed fetter better, like, is a fetter, but either one's gonna be fine. There are people who don't like to use fetters, and people who do like to use fetters, and it's back and forth. I like fetters, obviously, because there's also this reasonable idea that a blunt sword made to the full dimensions of a sharp sword is going to handle strangely, because you have too much mass at the edge. So like, that's part of the reason why these look like this, is that their edges are super thick, right? And you don't have like on a sharp sword, this would be drawn out, drawn like pulled into a edge, and that's going to mean that you're going to have about the same amount of material, but it's going to be pulled. The thing about like Play-Doh and like trying to like flatten out Play-Doh, it's kind of the same idea. So you're flattening that out into the edge. And so if you have a sword that is blunt, but it's made to the same like width of a sharp sword, it's going to have a lot more material at the edges of that same profile, and that's going to make it a little bit chunkier in all respects. So that's kind of the counterpoint to doing a blunt sword as opposed to a fetter. And then blunt swords also tend to just kind of hit like trucks. They don't tend to, with one of these you have this nice little like narrow section that'll give, right? It's easy to make these things flex very gently, and then if you have a big chunky full width blunt, they don't tend to behave quite so nicely. We're recording a video on delivering beats to weapons. That's a fun one. About when it's okay to do those and when it's not okay to do those, and so on, so forth, whatever. Fun times. Oy. Why am I tired? I've been that late. Oh. Yeah. Go do some sword squats. But as far as the one-handed fetter, if you also just get the one you want, like get the if there's one that if you really like, the one-handed Virginia Trenier, then go get that one. Like don't at the end of the day, like getting the one you want is going to be the more useful thing to do, as long as it's not like a situation where you get it and you hate it, because like you thought it looked really cool, but everybody told you the handling was going to be garbage, and then you get it and you're like, wow, I hate using this thing. Then listen to people. But if it's like if it comes down to those kind of things of like I just really want this thing, and it's comes from a reputable place, and people say pretty good things about it, but it's a blunt versus fetter debate. Get the fetter because you're going to be more likely to practice with a thing that you like. Like I love this Siggy, and I'm always just playing with it. So I'm much more likely to use this for practice than something that I don't enjoy using. So there's that. Tired. Still thinking about the darks. That Dark Souls video has long surpassed the life expectancy I thought it would have. I'm like still dealing with it. I'm like, why was that video so hot? I don't know. I still think about it because I'm like, I still don't like the position. I keep coming back to it, and I don't like this. I don't like it. This feels weird to me. I don't like it. I keep trying to think like maybe I gave it maybe I was too hard on it or something. And I'm like, this feels bad to me. And not just from like a I've been fencing kind of perspective, just like, why am I holding it out? Like, this feels unnecessarily taxing, like holding it out away from my body like this, and then keeping the blade out. And it's just, this is like engaging my back, and I'm using energy just to keep it here, and I don't feel like I'm getting anything for the energy I'm putting into it, as opposed to like same kind of idea of I can put it, my arms out, and if I put my point forward, well, now I'm getting something from it, right? Now I've got my point on line. I feel I've got this sword between me and whatever's coming at me. I can, cover lines. I feel like I'm getting something for the energy expenditure, whereas this is just kind of like, well, it's there. I mean, I can kick it forward, but again, I feel like people were misunderstanding the point I was trying to make with it, because they kept arguing like reasons to do it, but for me it was not that you couldn't do things at all from it, but that it was inherently a less beneficial position to be in than any of the other positions that I was close to. It was sort of just in the middle. It was just in the middle of everything. Like if I'm hanging out here, I could be here, could be here, could be here, could be all these different places. They give me something a little bit more as opposed to just here, where I'm not getting anything. I don't know. Then there are people who do like to fence low, but even when I watch people, I don't like to fence this low with my Vomtog or anything, but people do. People will fence this like down here with the Vomtog, but that's still different. This is still not this. That's the issue I think that gets overlooked. They see the sword being held here, and they think, well, this is just some kind of Vomtog. I'm like, but the blade is already forward, because the position is literally just sword in the hand, holding it at the waist. It's just hold it at the waist, and doing that means that your blade's kicked forward, the hands are forward, everything's forward, and I think that's the crux of my issue with the position is that everything's forward, but nothing's forward enough or back enough. From a gaming perspective, it's fine in the sense that if I'm forward, in order to throw a cut, I come back, I throw a cut. That's good for a video game because it's more, right? The cut, the player is reacting to ooh, this, as opposed to this. It's like twice the animation, more or less. Do I have a favorite guard when I'm sparring? A couple, I guess. I have some that I prefer. Given the trajectory of this discussion, it should come as no surprise. I'm actually quite a fan of being down here. I really like this position. I use this a lot. I love being down here. And then I will use the mirrored position of I will come over here. Well, I guess if you really want to be like super mirrored, it'd be like there. But the idea of just being like hands being in their position and then turning off to the shoulder, turning off to the shoulder. The tricks you do from either position are kind of the same. You know, I'm coming up, I'm coming up. They're essentially interchangeable, but I'll switch between the two of them depending on what I'm trying to do, because this one's a little bit easier to pop the tip up with. This one I have to kind of fling it forward, get the tip forward. This one's a little more cutty, this one's a little more thrusty, but I'll switch between the two of those. I'm quite fond of those. I don't use Oliver too much. I will instead, depending on how you define them, you could call this Oliver. I think it's perfectly fine to refer to either of these as Oliver. I don't think there's anything like inherently un-Oliver about them, but they're not like the textbook Oliver. I guess the textbook Oliver is right forward. Yeah, because you get to it at the end of a cut. But yeah, I prefer to be a little more off, or a little more off that way. So I use those two a lot. I will use plow a lot. I'm a big fan of plow. And when I do plow here. I don't like to do this like really forward plow. I have gotten hit on the hands too many times to do that anymore. I've learned that lesson, and other people have not learned that lesson. And to those people, I say, got your hands. There's nothing that'll teach you to keep those hands back here quite like getting tagged on the arms over and over again. Because that's what happens. As soon as, it's not so much the hand, as much as that arm. Because if you look at me here, as soon as I go to here, look at that distance. Like, that is so much more range. Because my body hasn't changed. My body's not any closer to you. But, you know, let's pretend you're my opponent, right? Like, pretend you're over there. You collectively, the viewers, pretend you're my opponent over there. And I'm standing like this against you. And we're at some measure. Maybe I'm out of measure or whatever, but you know, you could maybe get a cut around here, right? You cut in, maybe. And I'm keeping my body safe. You know, my leg is forward, but it's not really a target here because of the fact that cutting low, you have less reach because you're coming from your shoulders. You have less reach, so the fact that my leg is forward doesn't actually mean it's really in that much more range, just by factor of that. So this leg being forward isn't that big a deal. Effectively speaking, my distance, my exposure right now is here. This is everything that's in range. If my hands are also here, then all of my body is kind of at the same measure, essentially. But as soon as I do this, I try to take a more forward plow position. All of a sudden, these hands have now extended. The entire length of my forearm is now projected away from this measure, and that makes it so much easier to hit these. So much easier. Because my body is just as committed as it was before. So that's why I tend to, when I'm in plow, I tend to be back here, way back here. I will just hang out like my pommel, like at my hip. I will just be right here, keeping my hands nice and safe behind my sword. Sometimes I'll creep out, but if I start to creep out, I'll usually go out into a thumb grip. So if I go into long point, I'll do long point from here. Sometimes I'll do it from there, but for the most part, I switch to a thumb grip. I do my long point there. Yeah, I find that when I'm gassed, I still like I guess the whole thing about the Dark Souls one is not. It's a combination for me. It's the hands being out and the blade being forward but not on. I think that like if if one of those was changed, I'd be a lot better with it. Like if it was hands forward but blade back, this feels like a good resting position to me. I could see somebody going around, you know, just resting their sword like this, and then, you know, they cut out of it, right? This is a gassed position you see a lot. People, you know, maybe they're holding their bomb top up here, and as they get tired, it's kind of, and then before too long they're down here because they're just being lazy at that point. But this is still like you can still throw the cut because the blade's still back, so I can still shoot the blade forward and get a good cut out of it. So as long as that blade's back, I have distance over which I can accelerate it, as opposed to being out here, where my distance to target is like there. Like I have that much distance to accelerate it over. Not great. Oh, that's exciting. Hope you have fun sparring. And of course, I also just stand around doing it like this, right? I don't mind this script. It's not about to walk like this either. Yeah, I just yeah, I just don't feel it. I don't feel this. And then of course there's the blocking guard, which is kind of awful. How do they block? They block like this, right? Is that the Dark Souls block? This is terrible. Don't block like that. That's no good. It's a bad block. This is bad. The reason why it's bad. Collapse. That's why it's bad. You are generally like crossing your body. Doesn't tend to work out very well for positions. Like when we hold these plow guards, we should keep them generally on. We'll come up to the center of our body, but as soon as you start to cross your body, that creates an opening right here that can be exploited and collapsed. So our guard positions all kind of bear that in mind. Or they take a very strong center line and you pivot the body itself. That's more of a like Fiore way approach to it. Of you take a structurally sound position. This is, this is keeping it the blade at the core. The arms are nice and tucked in. This is a very strong position to receive blows from. And so you just turn this structure. You turn the structure towards the opposition, and then you'll note if I'm turning towards something on this side, I'm addressing it, but at no point is this structure becoming collapsible like in this situation. Yeah, you get that. I don't think you necessarily get a stronger thrust. I don't think that's necessarily a how to put this? Like the strength of your thrust comes from your body predominantly. Like I would say, I hate the 90. I'm going to say 90% of your strength, right? So to speak, 90% of your strength comes from your body moving, not your arms. If you're trying to get like the power of your thrust from your arms, I think that's not the place to get the power from for it. But I also think in a contributing factor, the amount of force behind a thrust like this versus a thrust like this, I don't think it's particularly relevant, because the thing that's doing the work here is the body coming forward. This is strong. This is strong. It's the body doing the work there. That's the addition of the punching out with the arms is not particularly important to the overall strength of the thrust. But the displacing factor, I think, is important, because if I am extended and there's another blade I'm dealing with, and I have to do that thrust, I have lost the ability to punch. To punch against the blade that I'm trying to oppose. So I think that's the real magic of keeping your blade back on the thrust, is not the power you get at the end of the thrust, but rather the ability to keep those hands in reserve, to punch into the position you want to take to deliver the thrust from there. That's my opinion on it. I have a favorite book to recommend for HEMA. I'm still working on that. I don't really have one yet. Uh, hmm. Yeah, I don't have a particular favorite yet. Um, I mean, there's or any that I could like list by name. Jude Lev is good. So the Jude Lev book it's a blue and yellow half-parted blue yellow cover with a knight on the cover. It's a very well composed book. I just from like a book standpoint, it's great because it gives you the translation and then the original transcription side by side, so you can actually like directly compare. Sometimes you get translation books like I have a 1570 Meyer, and it's just the translation, so you can't cross compare it with the original text because sometimes that's something you want to do. Is you want to like maybe like I don't know if I agree with the translation here. I want to look at the original. And you can kind of keep both. So that's the way that Jude Lev book is structured. Is you get columns of the original. I think they have three translations. They have the original transcription, a modern German translation, and then a modern English translation. I think is how they do it, and so you can kind of like cross-reference between the three of them. And then it also has like it has a couple like string bookmarks built into it, which are super helpful because it's a reference book, right? You're reading techniques from it, so you're going to be flipping pages quite often in it. So it's very helpful to be able to just to have those built in. And it's a very pretty book, so it looks great on a coffee table. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Snake teeth, yeah. Like I'm not saying that like you don't like punching throwing the arms forward in the thrust doesn't give you something along the way, but I think at the end point, any power generated from the arms is is a marginal addition to the overall strength of the thrust. And when we're talking about thrusting up a tiny little, well, not this, but talking about thrusting a itsy bitsy little point through something, that's going to be a very minor factor of the overall force applied to that tip. Let's see what else. Yes, rotating the body is good to build up energy for the strike. That's kind of like what you always want to be rotating the body through pretty much anything you can. Even if you're Meyer says that every cut has a step. I don't know if I entirely agree with him, honestly. But it depends on how he's interpreting it, I guess. Like what is the essence of the step? Like does he mean a full traversal, or does he just mean a like is this a step? Like does that constitute a step? Maybe if that is, then I agree with him. If he's like boom boom, I think he doesn't even necessarily practice what he preaches in that case. But all the same, the key thing is that boom hips. I think that's the root of it. Is if your hips are not pivoting, like if you're not getting that hip rotation, then no good. Like you could, like if I completely isolated my hips and like locked them in and I just went, yeah, I could probably cut through something, but it's not going to be the same driving force of putting my whole body into it. And you can do that and gain so much power without any like additional muscle strain. Like if I want to put more arm into it, like there comes a point where I start to like strain the muscles to do it, right? Like you can get to that point where you're like, yeah, and things start to pull a little bit. But the hips just rotate. Like you're just doing what they do. Like you're gaining so much power from just this, and it's not something that your hips have to like work particularly hard to do. They just do it, and by doing that, you're moving your entire body weight through that action, and you're gaining so much strength for very little investment on your end. So if you really want to cleave through something, you do a full step. That will give you a full-on pass through your whole body. If you think about it, the whole weight of your body is now moving forward. So you're driving forward with the full weight of your body, plus the acceleration you put into it, plus the acceleration your arms have put into it. And then to finish it off, not only have you accelerated your body forward, you then, at the very end of this cut, you sink with it. So now you are dropping your body weight. And that gets transferred a little, at least in part, into this. So you're now driving down with the body. And that can create a lot of power very quickly. And once again, largely for free on your end, because that's all Mother Earth doing it for you, pulling you down to the ground. So all you're just letting the Earth do it for you. Free energy. Of course, when you go down, you have to come back up again, but hopefully your cut has landed and you've done something good with that. Does anybody have any last questions? Because I kind of want to wrap things up here in a bit. I still have my buckler, I have my longsword, I have my montante, and I have my rapier. I have all of these here. When fencing someone, should your back leg switch front to back or stay back? I'm not quite sure what you mean. So, like, do you mean like I'm fencing, and no matter what I do, this back leg is always behind my body? Is that what you mean? Okay, so regarding the double slash, I don't remember what double slash looks like. I've used it before, I think, but I can't remember what it looks like. Okay, so should you switch? That's going to depend on what system you're learning. So certain rapier, that's going to be more common with like rapier systems that you don't switch, but there are some rapier systems that do switch. So it's going to depend entirely on what you're studying. I'm not aware of any longsword system that does not switch. So with longsword, you are switching. With longswords, you're switching all the time because every time you do something, you've switched. You know, if I might have cut, I've switched. I might thrust and switch. I mean, I could potentially thrust without switching, but you know, if I switch all the time, passing off line, cutting, switching, coming up to the other side, you're always switching which foot's forward with longswords. The Zettel likes to encourage you to lead with your non-dominant side's foot. So if you're right-handed, it likes you to lead with your left foot. So it says the Zettel says to like go with the left and strike on the right, or something to that effect. Go with the left. So the way we interpret this to mean is you're basically playing your game, your preliminary footwork game. You're playing that left foot forward to go with the left and strike on the right. So you pass once you're done setting up whatever your distance game is, and you've reached the distance you want to be at, then you stop. You've finished going with the left, and now you go with the right. And then they say, so it's go with the left and step on and strike on the right, and then left to right. So what they're basically saying is, you know, you're starting with your left, you go right, then left to right. So they want you to basically just continue to switch. So a very basic play is the Zornort. So that's you Zorn, you go with the left. Try to set something up. If you get the thrust, you go with the right, or I guess that's not quite what I want to do. There are a few ways it can play out. Let me do it this way. So we're going with the left. We throw the cut on the right. We try to set something up. Maybe we get pushed offline. If we get pushed offline, we go left. Oh, caught my sleeve. Go left to right. So go with the left, step to the right, then left to right. So it's that kind of idea of switch, 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 whatever you need at that moment. Yeah, I like longsword. I mean, I've been doing longsword for like 8 years. I'm still not bored of it. A lot of people get bored of longsword after a while, and then they move on to something else, and they're like, "Oh, this is so much fun." And I'm like, "Here I am, 8 years later. Longsword's still my favorite." People get surprised by that. When I talk to HEMA people and stuff, they're like, "Really? You've been doing this how long, and longsword's still your favorite?" I'm like, "Yeah. It's what got me into it. It's what I still love. It hasn't changed. I started doing this because I wanted to use a longsword, so I get to still use a longsword. I don't have anything to complain about." Yeah, I can go into that. Dyson, I can get into that. And then, does strength matter in medieval combat? Yes, but also, no, yes, no. Yes, like fitness, strength, speed, these things are always important. But it wouldn't be an art if the weak could not overcome the strong with skill. So that's generally the thing, right? Like skill is number one. If you are skilled, skill is better than everything else. If physical attributes are great, skill is better. But if skill is equal, physical attribute is, if two people are equal skill and one of them's got better strength, then they're going to have that advantage, right? So yes, strength is important, but it is not a strength competition. People who fight purely with strength tend to get known as buffalo. People who just go like, "I'm big and strong, I'm going to smash you." Those kind of people you can actually beat quite easily if you know how. They're very, very easy to read. And it's often just a game of just not being there. If they want to come in and clobber you, you just kind of let them come in, do their big swing, and then like do something. You'd be like, "Okay, you're doing your big swing. That's great. That's a super committed action. You sure you want to do that? Okay. I'm going to come up behind your swing, redirect you. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to meet strength with strength. Why would I do that? I'm going to lose. So I'm going to meet the strength with just nudging you. I'm just going to nudge, come in. It's like all those disaster movies with an asteroid coming in towards the Earth. You're never going to stop that asteroid. Don't try. You can't. It's coming in too fast. So what you do is you put rockets or bombs or whatever, and you say, "No, go that way. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm going to tell you to go that way instead." It's the same idea. That big swing is coming straight down on your head, and you say, "Well, I could try to stop it, but he's a lot stronger than me. So instead, I'm going to come up behind it, hit it on the side, and shunt it that way. I don't have to stop it. I just have to not make it. I just have to make it not go the same direction it was going before, which is a lot easier to do." Hello there. Okay. Now we have the question about the thrusting and the question about the nobles. So I'm going to answer the question about the nobles first because that's the quicker topic. That depends. Always. Everything with this depends. So it depends on when, mostly. This is very much a when question. So there is something known as, that gets referred to as common fencing, the common fencer. These, per the name, it's the people who can fence, who presumably have like been self-taught. Maybe they've picked up some things. Maybe they have been taught by somebody, but they don't necessarily know all the secret little tricks that some of the other people know. And in our medieval period frame, a lot of the fencing masters are deliberately containing that information, and they take great pains to preserve the secrecy of their art, and they're very selective about who gets to learn their techniques. Because if everybody knows their techniques, they don't work so good. Which is part of the theory as to why plays get super, super complicated in the Renaissance, is not just that they are trying to be complicated for complicated's sake, but because the meta has shifted. Everybody, think about like when people first start playing a video game and they're trying to figure things out, and then there are like a couple tricks that like just keep working over and over and over again, and they're great. But once people have learned to play the game, those tricks stop working. I think about like For Honor. Um, like I remember like Kensei, he had this like side dodge move where he would like dodge to the side and you'd cut, or I guess I think he would dodge and he would cut opposite the direction of his dodge, and that was like oppressive early on. But then people figured out what it was, and it stopped working quite so well. Now it's considered to be like a really risky move to do because people know how to beat it. So you could say maybe the same thing happened with fencing, is that eventually enough people caught on to some of these tricks that they weren't working so good anymore. So people started to layer up the complexity of the actions to make them work again. But yeah, when you get into the Renaissance, the idea of swordsmanship being a noble, a purely like thing for nobles to do, that goes out the window. Fencing becomes way more democratized, with like fencing masters having like day jobs as cutlers and stuff. Like Meyer was a cutler. They have day jobs. Yes, yes, I have. Oh boy, this is so exciting. I always love when someone asks about left-handed fencers. Oh, but I'm going to answer that later because I meant to answer Peace Walker. So dialing back right to what I was saying earlier about how thrusts are mostly delivered by the body, not by the arms. That is kind of an important factor in the ease of thrusting with a big sword versus a lighter sword. So two ends of the spectrum here. I have my montante and my rapier. Both of these will land that thrust with more or less the same force because my body, barring the weight of the swords adding to it, my body will reach there at the same point. It's regardless of that. That's one of the things that's sort of independent of these, is the fact that I'm just moving my body forward. So let's see, either thrusting that way or thrusting that way. Along that straight line movement, they're kind of the same, but the weight of the sword will matter in the recovery from that extension. So if I extend out with a big sword, it's going to be a little bit more work to pull that back than to pull back. If I thrust out with this, it's a lot easier for me to pull that back, or just to shoot it out to extension. To get it into the position and back from the position, it'll be a little bit quicker, but the end result of thrust, point into body, that's going to be about the same. And then another factor is when you have a bigger, heavier sword, the bigger, heavier sword is harder to move out of the way for them. There's more mass here. So you have that going for you. It's going to be way more work for that rapier to push this out of the way than it is for this to push that out of the way. What else do we have? Right, have I... Okay, so... get my long sword back out. I love when this righty-lefty, like, did they teach people to fence left-handed when that comes up? And yes, we have text. It's in the Zettel. So, like, talk about, like, handedness affirming text. Most German fencing masters cite back to the Zettel, at least in some, they give it some amount of service. And the Zettel says, it's not much, it doesn't have much to say on the matter. It says, if you are right-handed, you want to prefer to strike on the right, on the left, you will limp. And if you are left-handed, it says to strike on the left, because on the right, you will limp as well. That's the advice. That's basically the sum total of righty versus lefty advice. It's just, if you are right-handed, you will be stronger on your right, and if you are left-handed, you are stronger on your left. Congratulations, you should fence that way. Talk about, like, identity affirming. They don't tell you to fence. They don't tell you to fight right-handed if you're a lefty. They just say, just fight on your left, fight on your right. Now that's the Zettel. Okay, so depending on what other sources you're looking at, whether or not they teach you to fence left-handed is going to depend on the culture, because in some cultures, at certain points in time, the left hand becomes the sinister hand, the not good hand, and if you are left-handed, you won't be, and you don't get a choice in the matter. You will fence right-handed. So that's one thing. And then sometimes, other schools of thought is, are you right-handed or left-handed? Doesn't matter. You're going to learn to fence both. Because you never know. Maybe you get hurt and you can't hold your sword in your right hand. And you're like, well, I have a perfectly good left hand, and I'm not left-handed. It sure would have been nice if I had learned to use my sword in my left hand. And so they take that approach. They're like, well, you're going to learn to use it in one hand, and you're going to learn to use it in the other hand. And then when you've learned to use it in both hands, we'll let you use two swords. And then you can be really fancy. So yeah, there's, a little bit of everything. It just depends on what you are studying and what the societal inclinations of the author were at the time. Oh boy, Zettel. I always mess it up. I think it's Zettel. I think. Yeah, I think it's Zettel. I always spell it wrong though when I'm doing it. So I don't know if I finally remembered it the right way, because I think I used to spell it Zettle, but I think it's Zettel. Oh boy, height is being tall is great. Being tall gives you reach. Yeah, I think the Zettel is the recitation. The recitation. So I guess some word shift then. It happens, right? Over time, words change meanings. But yeah, height, back to height. Yeah, so height does a lot of things. Not all of them are benefits, but the benefits they give you are significant. So with height comes reach, because when you are taller, you tend to have longer limbs. Longer limbs means you can hit them from further away than they can. Also means longer. If you have longer arms and longer legs, you can cover more distance on each step. That's useful too. And these things tend to emerge pretty much as a range thing. It tends to be the most predominant expression of height difference, that the person who's taller has more reach than the person who is shorter. This also makes it easier for the tall person to get shots on the head. It is a lot easier to land the hits on the head against the short person than the short person against the tall person, because the tall person can kind of wrap. Here we can load the camera here. So if you're short, I have made you all short, and I'm tall. I can now see how much, think about getting that shot on my head, whereas all I have to do is I can kind of pop over and hit like that. But then if you are suddenly very tall, and I'm now short, I have a much harder time getting, I can't get that same over the top wrap. I would have to go higher to be able to wrap over the top of the head. So it's more work for me to get there. The flip side is that short people tend to have a easier time getting to the underside of the arms, especially when there's a significant height difference. So that's the trade-off, is that the tall person gets the top wrap shot. They can wrap over the top. Your guard, you start to kind of have to hike it up, because against somebody that's the same height as you, you could be in ox, and my head's safe. But I am not safe if somebody's taller than me, because they'll just wrap over the top. So I have to start to hike this up higher to cover it. And then the tall person, the way their arms are exposed is You know, if they're, I guess I can show you with the camera. So like if I'm here or whatever, if I'm doing my thing, my arms are about that exposed. But if you are now, 1 second. Oh, there we go. Camera down. We're down. Ugh. If you are now much shorter than me, and you're looking up, and I start to do the same thing, these arms are now like way easier to get to. You basically just have a shot lined up right off the bat. All you have to do is just go up, and you've got the shot on the arms. So tall people have to watch out for that all the time, because short people will just kind of go like, they'll just drive straight up into your arms. They are relentless with that. I don't really have much saber experience. Oh, what's my favorite montante technique? I mean, I love the idea of just the one-handed thrusts with montante. They feel so absolutely like, oh, terrifying. This idea that like I have this really long sword, and I can thrust it like that much further, like going one-handed with it. That is terrifying. So I really love the thought of one-handed thrusts with the montante. And then think about like if you do it with a like passing step. Oh my gosh, that is so much reach. Let me see if I can like, if I put this here, I walk it. That didn't work. Oh well, you get the idea. So I love those. Yeah, Virginias are great. Like, everybody has their preferences, but I think pretty much everybody agrees that a Regenier is just kind of like the baseline for good, and they're great. I like my Siggy a lot, but honestly, just a Regenier fetter, especially, I really like the short fetter from Regenier. That thing's great. And, you know, like, the fit and finish on my Siggy is better, like, hands down. It is a better made sword, the Siggy, than the Regenier over here. But when it comes down to the, like, gist of it in their handling, I'd be happy using either one. The Regenier short is a little bit stiffer, and it's a little more cut oriented. Like how to describe it? It's like when you start to move it around and stuff, you feel it in the cut. It has a little bit more authority behind its cut than the Siggy does. I don't mean to say that it's sluggish. It's not sluggish, but it has a little more, like, it has a bit more punch. You can feel it when you cut with this thing. You feel the increase of punchiness to its cut, and then the Siggy feels a little more down here in the hilt. It doesn't have that same punch. It doesn't. That was one of my first things I noticed with this thing. Is it has very little punch to its cut. This is like a thrusting sword right here. It has very little punch, but it's very hand centric, and it's really easy to work that point into things. Yeah, this is my backyard. So I don't know. I still debate this like myself. Which one I prefer the handling of. I don't really have an answer. That's kind of the nature of the beast, is that everybody has their preferences. So there's not really a inherently better answer here. It's just going to be which one. My best recommendation would be find an opportunity to handle as many of them as you can, and play around with them and see if there's one that you take a preference for. Can I advise something for LARP longsword? That's tricky. That's tricky. Because LARP plays by different rules. So a lot of what I would recommend doing would be terribly illegal for you. So and the LARP rule sets change between different LARPs, so I don't even know what your rules are to recommend anything. Because I know a lot of LARPs don't allow shots to the head. I think they often don't count shots to the hand either, which feels like bonkers to me. That's part of why you see in like LARPs or boffer fights that don't count shots to the hands, or SCA fighting where they wear gauntlets. The guard positions that they take like completely change, because earlier in the stream I was talking about like keeping the hands way back, because this protects your hands. Because if you're not wearing gauntlets, you don't have much to cover your hands here. But if hand shots don't count, then I have nothing to lose by bringing my hands forward. And you see a lot of people like defending themselves from these like hands out positions, because they get more coverage that way. They can hold their sword out, and they'll cover. They do this a lot. They will often do this as a cover, and especially if they don't allow thrusts. Sometimes they allow thrusts, but like if your hands can't get cut, and if your point can't be used, then all of a sudden, being out here, like covering like this and like this and these kind of wards start to make a lot more sense, because the hand, you can block with the hand at that point, and it really changes the meta. But try and do that in a HEMA context. Say goodbye to your hands. They're just going to get like snapped immediately. I'm trying to think of like what would be useful, but I don't know. What do I do? I work in law. I'm not law enforcement or anything. I'm not that. I work in legal lawness. The legal field is where I work. So it's one of those things where like there are only so many ways to move the body. The location, they might have different cultures or whatever, but like the biomechanics of the human body don't change. Like a German swordsman is going to move their body the same way a Japanese swordsman does. Like that's it. That's how bodies work. So you end up with a lot of if you then put in their hands a two-handed sword, they're going to start to do things that look very similar to each other, because there are only so many ways the human body can move while holding a stick of yay height and be able to fight with this thing in that way. The most important distinction between how those two would approach, I think, would be on the emphasis on that back edge. That is very important here. If you don't have a back edge, that changes a lot of things. If you do have a back edge, that gives you a lot of interesting options to play with. All these things that we can do with our back edge that you can't do if you don't have an edge back there. But I wouldn't say that they would be able to just like one-to-one like translate. There are still definitely going to be differences in what techniques are emphasized, or some techniques that don't even translate. It's important to preserve their distinctions, but accept that they are still working with the same bodies at the end of the day. So there's going to be a lot of overlap, but there's still going to be something distinguished. There's going to be cultural elements distinguishing them. And then also the implement that they're using will make a bit of a difference too. This crossguards also. Crossguards are very important here. I can't believe I forgot to mention them earlier. There are lots of things. This also translates to the LARP question. There are a lot of things that if I don't have a functional crossguard that I can trust to take hits and stuff, and like I can use this, that changes what I will do. Because there are a lot of things that I cannot do unless I have this. Namely, like all these fun little tricks when the swords come together, and I do these kind of things, and that kind of thing, and that. Oh, this position right here. Without a crossguard, this doesn't happen. And this part, this dynamic right here is really important to what we do. And if you don't have that, no good. Interesting. I was just thinking about how the schilt interacts, but then I'm because that's one thing, people don't necessarily like these big schilts because they think that this interaction right here is devaluing the art, because it's kind of like it's an extra layer of security to put your hand. And they're like, well, you know, this wouldn't be happening, it'd be this. And so, you know, you see how that hand could get pinched there. My hand is a lot safer. You can still get pinched, but it's still a lot safer. But I like having my schilt. I pronounce it schilt. I think it looks nice too. I mostly do early KDF, although I'm starting to study Meyer in my own personal studies. Yeah, LOL's fun. Thank you, thank you. I think it's getting dark out here. It's been about an hour and a half on stream. I'm gonna wrap it up and go get some dinner. Does anyone have any like last super duper last questions before I go? Otherwise, I'm gonna wrap it up. I guess I can do one last little parade of swords for anybody who wandered in here. So I'll work on that while I'll give you all a chance to answer or ask questions. So this is my Siggy Shorty. This is my personal sword. It's got my little birdie, my little robin. So this is my personal sword. This is the one I use in competition, in like everything. This is my sword. This is a newer acquisition. This is my VB Meyer Rapier. I have mixed feelings about this thing. It's a good little sword, but your mileage is going to vary, I think, depending on your hand. I find that my hand does not agree with the ball pommel. There's something about the spacing on this arrangement that means that when I'm using this thing, the ball pommel often hits my palm, like the ball of my palm, and so I end up with this situation where I'll be doing things and then it'll hit that and it'll actually like kick it, and I have a hard time. I'll often find that in my manipulations of the sword, I will keep jamming the heel of my palm into this pommel, and it'll turn the sword in my hand, and I end up like throwing cuts that are crooked like this because the sword, like the pommel turned the sword in my hand while I was moving it, and that I find that to be immensely frustrating. Other than that, which is it's a me thing, it's the shape of it's my hand to that. Other than that, I rather like it. Oh, and the pommel also and in doing this, the pommel screws on with an Allen key and stuff, and so the fact that like my hand keeps like hitting it and banging it, it starts to loosen over time. But those are all like me issues. This is the Regenier Short. This is my wife's sword. I have used it some. I really like this thing. This is my #1 recommendation. Like full on, like if you are new to HEMA and you're looking to get your first fetter, this right here is my #1 unopposed recommendation. Siggy Short for your first sword. I think it is the perfect beginner sword. If you want to eventually move on to other things, it's a good way to go. But this is, as far as fetters go, this thing is relatively speaking cheap. It lasts forever. They're super hardy. They behave great. You want for nothing other than the fit and finish with one of these. They're not pretty, but they work. They're very utilitarian. They just work. I have a junky buckler. I don't know who makes this. It's awful. Don't buy it. It's a bad buckler. I'm not even going to tell you. I'm not even going to tell you where I found it. Just don't buy this. I guess I would need to tell you where I bought it. I don't even know where I bought it. I don't know who makes this. But it's bad. Of course, I did put it through like severe punishment. So, and then last but not least, this is my Regenier Montante, number 4. This thing is still, it still has some of that utilitarian, because all, like, that's just kind of Bourguignon, is that they tend to be very utilitarian. But this is just very beautiful. Like, despite the utilitarian qualities of it, it is somehow, like, really just very elegant. I love the fuller on this thing. It is, and there's also this cool little detail where they finished, or rather they didn't polish the ricasso on this. So you see how it's a different tone. You see the blade being so much lighter than this. So they did. I guess they just didn't polish it as much, because it's not like straight from the forge or anything, but it's not finished like the blade is finished, or the edge is finished. And I really like how that looks. It just gives you this cool little two-tone quality to it. And you can kind of make it out here, but there's a bit of a pattern to it. It's got a little bit of a patina. You can see the kind of blemishes throughout. And I just think I think it looks really cool. So, yeah, this is my baby. That's my comp. That's, you know, that Siggy is the one I fight with, but this thing is just like, oh, I mean, you not love this thing. It's as big as my. It's huge. How can you not love this thing? Have you ever seen a more beautiful thing? Oh. Anyways. Yeah, I should do some more. I'm probably going to get back into Elden Ring here. I've been a little burned out on Peace Walker. I've been a little burned out, admittedly, on the Dark Souls Elden Ring stuff, just because I'm getting really tired of the comments that I get on the video, and it's hard to find the motivation to make a new one. If I do find the motivation to do another one, I will try to keep that in mind if I remember. No guarantees I'll remember it, but I will endeavor to do something to that effect at some point, if I can get around to it. It depends on how much I want to endure the hate mail on it, because people really don't like it when you give commentary like that on games. Like, it's just a game, get over it. I'm like, it's fun to talk about. I'm not like upset. It's just fun to talk about. Yeah, place to buy good quality cutting swords. I mean, Albion's are amazing, incredible swords. They're very expensive though. So if you, I'm gonna phrase the question like this: basically, there is a cold steel. Cold steel's not great, but like if you just want to get a sword that you can cut with, and you're not like big into swords, and or you're just starting to get into swords, and you don't have like, you can't justify buying a really nice sword. The cold steel, I believe it's the Italian longsword, is perfectly acceptable. Let's go with that. It's perfectly acceptable. It'll work. It'll cut well, not amazingly, but like it works. People will win competitions using those things. Like, they're fine. They're perfectly fine swords. And then if you want a really nice sword, Albion is great. Everything Albion makes is amazing. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. Albion at the upper end, Cold Steel is on the bottom end, within the spectrum of swords that you actually want to use. So, you know, cutting all the junk out. Cold Steel is like the bare minimum, and then Albion is like the upper echelon. Tinker is up there. So Albion, Tinker are kind of up there. Valiant Armory up there. Arms and Armor up there. Down at the bottom, Cold Steel, Hanwei, Windless. I think you're pretty safe to do Cold Steel, Hanwei, or Windless down there in the bottom. Kingston as well. I'm going to add Kingston. Kingston I actually kind of like a little bit more than those. So I put Kingston to be a smidge above those. Okie dokie dokie. That seems to be the gist of it. Oh, great, great. Yep. Yeah, so, you know, just take those ideas with you. I'll say it one more time. Just write, if you're writing it down, write it down now, because I'm going to end the stream. My top tier recommendations: Albion, Valiant, Arms and Armor, and Tinker. Well, maybe not even Valiant. Valiant's good. Maybe I'd put Valiant like one step below, in the same way I put the other thing one step above. So like my top three for quality, but also being stupid expensive, would be Arms and Armor, Albion, and Tinker. Those are your top like three off the shelf-ish, high end, going to break your bank, but they're really good. Then the one step below them, I'd put Valiant. And then at the bottom rung of the swords that will not be a waste of your money, but don't expect anything incredible, they will work, and they're not going to be pretty, but they're going to work. Hanwei, Cold Steel, and Windless. And then the one step above, I'd put Kingston, because Kingston, I've been surprised every time I get a Kingston sword. They're genuinely surprisingly good. So there you go. Anyways, I guess will be on my video, I guess. So if you ever need to do it, just go to the end of the live stream. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful night. I'm going to end the stream and go get some dinner.